everyone, welcome to the webinar hosted by Ciphr, how to get C-suite leaders on side with your HR tech project. It's great to have you with us today. I'm Catherine, I'm head of content here at Ciphr. I'm joined by my colleague James, who's head of sales. Hi James, how are you?
Hi Catherine, good, thank you.
Yeah, well, thanks. Good to have you with us today. Before we get started, if you're new to Ciphr, here's a little bit about us. We offer a range of HR solutions covering everything from central HR systems to recruitment, onboarding, payroll, e-learning and LMS. We're trusted by more than 600 clients across the UK with over 1.5 million end users. With our growing team of more than 230 experts, around 10% of our team are former customers. So we really do understand what HR professionals need from a HR systems partner and how to deliver so that you can use your systems to the best of your ability and really make a difference within your organizations. We won't be going into any of the specific functionality of our systems today, but if you want more information about us and what we do at any point, you can email us at info@ciphr.com or you can visit our website, which is ciphr.com. So here's a look at today's agenda. James is going to be taking us through why the C-suite matters when it comes to HR system selection, how to talk their language, how to navigate your internal procurement process. Every organization's procurement process is slightly different, but there are some broad principles that can help you navigate that process with ease. And how to position yourself as a credible force for change. I think that's an element that people don't really talk about enough when it comes to making the business case for HR software, is how to make yourself a believable project leader and really secure that buy-in from other areas around the business. So that's what we've got lined up today. I'm going to disappear and let James take over. So take it away.
Thanks, Catherine. That's great. Brilliant. So first we're going to look at, I guess, why C-suite matters. If I just move on to my first slide. So you're at the time in your projects where you found the right HR system, and it may have taken you months to get there, but you're there and it's a huge achievement. And now at that stage, there's typically one thing left to do before you can start your new project, and that's to convince C-suite to invest. But it doesn't have to be scary, it really doesn't. So it's important, and it may seem obvious, but it's important to sort of remember that they are on your side. You absolutely share the same goal, which is to amplify your organization and your people. And if you know how to play the game, you'll be successful. And there are absolutely things that you can do to ensure that that last hurdle is smooth sailing. Would absolutely encourage you to look at viewing C-suite as an available resource to have on your side, and ultimately not your foe. But you can also look to build your own internal credibility along the way. So why is it important to get them on your side? So most of this may seem obvious, but ultimately you're not going to be successful unless you know how to play the game. And that's why it's time to view them as, again, a resource on your side and not against you. So please don't assume that they are against you. There are a number of ways that C-suite can hurt the project if you choose not to bring them with you on your procurement journey. And that could be things like prolonged decision making. So we often see projects stall towards the end of the sales process. Because of that, it could be changing priorities. So the goalposts can often move due to things that you're unaware of. It might be budget constraints. That's something that we often see where at the end of the process, there isn't a budget, or there is one, but you just didn't know about it. Risk aversion can lead to a cancelled project, especially if there's a compelling, isn't a compelling enough reason to do something now. You also have, obviously, lack of alignment, which can result in really just not understanding what C-suite need or even what expectations they have. Obviously, a demand for more data, facts and figures are important, and a potential communication breakdown. If, however, you can get them on side, there's some really powerful ways in how they can help you with your project. And that can be things like provide additional resource to help you procure and implement your new project. Aligning expectations around this can be a huge win, so just something to consider. Fast track approvals, C-suite can prioritize what you need. They can empower project leaders. They can be a champion of the project. And that's a really key one, because if you've got a C-suite back in, that means that you are not solely responsible for the project. So whilst you might take ownership, having someone on board at C-suite level is a really big win. They can set clear expectations on things like route to market, procurement, and potentially other business priorities. They can facilitate cross-departmental collaboration and, of course, monitor progress, but without the micromanagement. So how to speak C-suite language. So we're going to look at comments from our own C-suite and ultimately the important bits to look at considering for each. So we've got a comment, first of all, from our very own CEO, Sean. So Sean wanted to share this quote, which is ultimately, don't boil the ocean, get the basic system in, and then look to scale from there. So the CEO won't be too concerned around specific functionality. And to be completely honest, they probably won't have the bandwidth to be heavily involved in the project. Instead, they'll want you to look at building a comprehensive business case that essentially they just can't say no to. So when you think about putting that together, look at telling a story. What's the problem? Why is it costly for the organization? How does your proposed software solve it? What essentially is the solution to that problem? Data is hugely important. So look at your own internal data and try to answer questions like, why is this solving the problem and why is it a priority? And ultimately, how does our data compare to wider best practices or even industry averages? It's really important to look at focusing on long-term goals as well as short-term organisation priorities. But if you can do that and look at both immediate and technical priorities as well as those medium to long-term strategic goals, then again, it's not just about the now, it's also about the future. So how can we look at, again, getting the CEO on side? So ultimately, it's about showing how you'll measure success. How will you know if the project has been successful? And incorporate broad perspectives. And the reason we say that is because if your proposed investment seems like just a HR priority, then it's likely to get sidelined for other investments. And obviously, we absolutely don't want that to happen. So think about the broad perspectives. Don't get hung up on the format. So business cases can look very different. We've certainly saw and supported with a few different ones over our time, but ultimately they can look different depending on your house style and CEO's preferences. And if you're absolutely sort of hung up on sure, then look at business cases that have been signed off for other projects in the past and use that as a bit of a benchmark in terms of format. Show that you've conducted commercial due diligence. This is a big one. So the CEO will want reassurance and assurance that you've done your research to protect the organisation from ultimately what could be a bad investment decision. So next up, we've got a CTO. So we've got a comment from our own CTO, Andrew Stevens, which is that tech projects often overpromise and underdeliver. So it's quite a strong statement there, but something to certainly think about. So how to get the CTO on side? And there's two big things there, security and certainty. So when we think about security, this is absolutely the CTO's biggest concern. It's the number one. So the CTO will expose security from every possible angle. Explore security from every possible angle. Specific considerations will absolutely depend on your organization. So I would encourage you to think about bringing them into the project as early as possible to really understand what their needs are and find out what they'll need to know about potential vendors, because again, that can mitigate some of that risk by sort of getting that stuff ready for your CTO to look at. Vendors, we often do this. We're required and expected to complete due diligence, and that can come in many forms, such as information security questionnaires and IT questionnaires that will ask a range of questions around ultimately the way that we look after your data and how we keep your data secure. We also get asked often to evidence accreditation, so things like ISO 27001, Cyber Essentials, or even Cyber Essentials Plus, which is the highest standard, because those things essentially demonstrate that we are certified to a high standard. Certainty, again, is the second sort of big thing here to think about. So the CTO is looking for a clear problem versus solution narrative. The benefits of new software should really outweigh the pain of change, but you can build certainty in a number of different ways, such as being as objective as possible, recording demonstrations, flagging timestamps, and covering off the practicalities around things like timescales, cost, rollout process, vendor trustworthiness, etc. So there's two other things that we would sort of point out that your CTO will likely look for. The first is integration. So major business critical integrations, which in turn will mean no manual data transfer. And that's a really key point, because if you can automate the push and pull of data between systems, there's a stronger data integrity, again, which is important. It's vital. They'll also be looking at minor organisation-specific integrations that just look at making life easier, as well as out-of-the-box integrations that won't incur costs. So, for example, who do the vendors partner with already? Who do they currently have integrations with that you might be able to leverage? But also the potential of configurable integrations and the possibility to add custom integrations moving forward. Usability is next. So low adoption rates are one of the biggest hurdles. So ultimately, how are you going to mitigate that? And it could be doing things like thinking about pilot groups, whilst you're in projects. It could be thinking about how you're going to actually cascade training across to the end user, thinking about your way of communication pre and post launch, even things around incentives and competitions. So one thing that we tend to see works really well when thinking about naming your system is actually running a competition with the workforce, just to get them engaged and sort of aware of what's to come. So again, just things like that can all help towards improving the adoption rates when you go live with your new system. And your CTO will want to will want assurance that employees and managers will actually use the software. So that's really, really important. So think about how you can evidence their buy-in. Have they had a voice during your procurement process? Do you have champions that you can leverage? Are you making their life easy with your chosen solution? These are all things to sort of help with the argument that absolutely they're going to use it for these reasons. Okay, so next up, we're moving on to the CFO. So we've got, again, a comment here from our own CFO, Ray Berry. There can be a misconception that finance is adversarial and a gatekeeper to funds. That's not the case. So what do CFOs care about? So there's three major factors really that we think we should be looking at here. And the first is that it does not fit the proposed investment within the cost envelope for the business. If it doesn't, then ultimately that's a really quick no that you're going to get. So it's making sure that from a commercial perspective, it makes sense and it fits. The second is, has the CTO signed off on this from a technical perspective? Is the technology feasible to mitigate the risk of financial downside? That's a big one, making sure that, again, that CTO box is ticked. And then lastly, does the project make sense now? So again, we're going to hear this a couple of times through a number of slides. The biggest chunk of work is around, is it a now thing? You need to tell a story that essentially compels a CFO to invest now, and again, not something that's going to be sort of pushed down the road for 2-3 years' time. And here's just a couple of pointers on essentially how to get your yes. So again, think short term, think medium term and long term. So not just about now, but also how is this going to have that long term impact? Address vendor consolidation. So for example, it could be, what other solutions are vendors offering that essentially could replace other non-redundant systems within your organization? It's also about quantifying costs and benefits and being explicit about your full life cycle costs. That's a really key one. It's not just about what's the cost now, but on an ongoing basis, what does that look like and where's the certainty and reassurance there? Show that you've done vendor due diligence, another big one, and obviously don't overload them with information. So try and find a way to get that message across without too much information that you're sharing. We're now looking at the COO, and we've got a comment from our own COO, Claire Williams, which is that good HR software doesn't just make HR better, it also helps to better support every team across the organisation. So your COO will want to understand ultimately how your proposed software will deliver value both today and tomorrow. So again, not just looking at now, it's that future state as well. And their typical priority is going to be things like operational efficiency, productivity, working model, strategic alignment, scalability. Now, typically the COO's responsibility is to predict and to prevent as many risks as possible. So that's a big job. And some of those things will include supplier chain, reputational risk, value alignment, pricing and contract, security support, longevity. Again, so just some things to be aware of around what your COOs are going to be thinking about. And here is another strong quote. We're more likely to agree to your proposal if you show why this decision can't be deferred for another 3 to 5 years. So again, a running theme there around why does it need to be now, and what is the impact if we delay this any further. So next up, we have getting the Chief Human Resources Officer on side. So a few points to touch on. Show the pain, show why the status quo is hurting us using data, anecdotes, and obviously best practices to support. Evidence your thinking with data. I can't stress that enough. Show your request for investment isn't just a whim. It's well evidenced, it's well thought out, it's insightful and powerful because of the data that you've got to represent that. Understand the CHRO's commercial responsibilities. So there needs to be a genuine organizational need for HR software, and show how you'll make the life easier in terms of implementing the new solution. Ultimately, look, that isn't an easy feat. So offering to take as much ownership of that as possible will absolutely bolster your case. And here are just a couple of the questions, essentially, that you're probably going to be expected to answer. Will you research rigorously? And the things to consider there is be impartial, compare products, build a long list, get personalized demonstrations, shortlist vendors, book second demonstrations, conduct checks. Have you considered practicalities? For example, do you need a solution that's going to support your global requirements? Have you thought about implementation and usability, pricing and contract, scalability, internal bandwidth, integration, support and training? And will this project thrive long term? So again, that future state. And again, things for you to consider there would be the general sort of ongoing maintenance. What does that look like? Who owns that? Customer relationships, but also potential future challenges as well. So I'm going to give you a few tips based on our experience of supporting thousands of projects over the years. So what does your procurement team prioritize? This is a really important one. And it may be that you're sort of sitting there thinking, well, we don't have, as far as I'm aware, a procurement team. But ultimately you will do. You just need to find out who those individuals are. And when you're able to establish that, essentially who would need to be involved in the procurement process to do their due diligence, to sign off on this, you can then start to look at actually what will they prioritize. And some of the key things that we expect and that we see very often are things like proof of value. So how do we know that essentially the solution will be delivered as promised? Can we see case studies, success stories and stats from past customers maybe? Payback period, how long until we see value? Can we eke out incremental value early and then build momentum? So just going back to our CEO's comment around get the basic system in and then scale up from there. Contract lengths and terms, that's a really key one. Does this align with your own purchasing policies? If not, is there flex with the vendor to fix it? Pricing, how much does the software cost over its life cycle? And does, again, that align with your purchasing policies if you have them? And also, is it actually market competitive? Implementation, how long will the rollout take and what does the process look like? How much internal resource will it take and what are the potential risks? What could go wrong? Vendor security, what policies does the vendor have to keep our organization and people safe? Again, another big box that needs to be ticked. And how fast will the vendor actually address the problems? Vendor reliable and reputation, how do we know that we can trust them? Again, have we spoken to other customers? Have we looked at case studies? How likely are they to default on delivery, leaving us out of pocket? Those are some of the things that typically we tend to find that procurement teams or individuals prioritize. Now, the next slide, I've chosen sort of two examples of hurdles to try and avoid when you get to the end of the procurement process. And again, I'd just like to sort of take this time again to stress the importance of getting C-suite involved at the beginning of your project, because this ultimately is going to really help to mitigate any hurdles that you might come up against along the way. So the reason why I've chosen commercial and contractual is because both are incredibly important and both can significantly delay a project when you're at that sort of final sign-off stage. Commercials covers everything like cost, ongoing cost, renewal mechanisms, notice periods, contract durations, project scope and scopes of works. And contractual is essentially the agreement itself, which offers protection to both the vendor and the customer, whilst also setting out the roles and responsibilities of each. So again, understanding what the road to procurement looks like within your organization is key to mitigate those two things. So from a commercial perspective, again, what is your purchasing policy? Do you have a budget? And what is that budget? What contract duration would you consider? All the things essentially to know ideally before you engage with suppliers. So when you get to your sort of point where you've got a short list, a handful, 2 or 3 typically, that you then want to sort of take internally and look at more deep dive presentations and look at introducing C-suite to get some exposure. At least at that point, if you know this information, you can have those conversations with vendors to make sure actually can they be part of that short list. Contractual. Again, another big one. Who do you need to put the agreement in front of, and how early can you do this? So again, there's lots of different sort of avenues that our customers go through in terms of contractual, and that might be external legal resource. It might be that you have a legal firm that you would go to for things like this for support. It might be that you've got your own legal counsel. It might be that your own COO is a whiz on contracts and he's going to be the person looking at the contract. So understanding who that is, and ultimately how quickly you can get them to start looking at the contract is key, because that typically tends to be the longest delay at the end of a project, because reviewing contracts and ultimately working with a vendor to make that contract mutually acceptable can take months. So the earlier you can do that, ideally when you've got to preferred stage, the better. Again, just some examples of commercial and contractual hurdles that we've come across in the past. So contractual is a really easy one. We've had sort of scenarios where Ciphrs got to preferred and there's been a little bit of a lack of understanding around that procurement process, which we then sort of work with the customer to unpick. But ultimately, we sort of discover that in terms of contractual, again, there's third-party legal firms that are getting involved to review our SASA. And we've had scenarios where actually the sign-off process has been delayed by up to 6 months as a result of back and forward. And again, the time it's taken to unpick that process. So I can't stress the importance of really sort of understanding who needs to see that agreement and getting it to them as early as possible. Because obviously when you get to the end of the project, typically most of our customers have got timescales that they're working towards, and that might be a compelling timescale because they've got a burning platform that's going to switch off, or it might be that there's business priorities and things happening within your organization that essentially means you really need a system in by a certain date to help you with some of the future challenges that you might be expecting to go through. Contractual. One of the big parts of a commercial. One of the big parts of the commercial piece is around cost. So, working with the vendor to understand actually in terms of your pricing model, does that fit with your purchasing policy? And a great place to start there is once you've completed your initial shortlist and you've got a range of sort of proposals that you can then look at an average cost for systems based on what you need, is have that sort of conversation with your CFO and anyone else that needs to be involved to look at actually what budget can we get before we then start engaging our final shortlist and making sure they fit within that purchasing policy within that budget. The commercial piece, again, can not just be around cost. It can also be questions around, well, actually, are you prepared to commit for a longer term? Typically, there might be more commercial incentives for a 5-year agreement over the 3, but is that something as an organisation that you're going to be willing to do? But also looking at sort of the intricacies around what are the ongoing costs? What's the notice period? What's the auto renewal mechanism? Does the payment schedule fit? So again, all these are sort of things that ideally, if you can get some exposure to around what it needs to look like to fit for your organisation at the early stage of the procurement process, then absolutely recommend that you do that, because it just makes, again, that sort of final sign-off hurdle around those 2 points as easy as possible. And one thing that we do within Ciphr that tends to work quite well is actually engage our own C-suite with our customers' C-suite, just to demonstrate that there's that sort of senior sponsorship at their level, but also around things like contractual and commercial. It's about trying to give them the sort of reassurance about us as a vendor and our resilience and our financial stability, so they've got that reassurance and comfort around the investment you're about to make with us as an organisation. So next up we have personal branding and credibility. And I've got a comment here, which is, it's a personal recommendation. It's your personal brand and internal currency at stake. How well this project goes determines whether you will ever get money for another one. So that's a pretty strong statement, and ultimately it's true. It's about getting it right and making sure that you keep and enhance your own brand and credibility within the organisation. So your personal credibility as a buyer is absolutely critical to securing investment, and you personally will play a huge role in ensuring the project's success. And here are just some key questions to consider. Is your business case robust? Is it credible? Is it pragmatic? Make sure you've rigorously prepared and have considered as many questions and perspectives and possible future scenarios as possible. Will you own the project from end to end? Show that you're committed for the long haul, or at least have good backup plan if ultimately you can't be. Do you have a realistic rollout plan? Show how you'll deliver incremental value fast and then scale. And again, that just goes back to the get the basics in and then scale up the solution. But just make sure that you've set the right expectations. And again, you can do that by involving C-suite early on in the process, so you don't suddenly have that pressure to go live with everything as soon as a contract has been signed. We've got another comment here from our CEO. So being tenacious and enthusiastic can be the final nudge to getting approval. So just bear that one in mind, and I think we will as well, and obviously when we're looking at our next project. So just as a means of a recap, ultimately the key sort of takeaway from this, which seems obvious, is that C-suite are on your side and can help you get your projects up and running without the hurdles and blockers that you might come across if they're not on side and not involved. The CEO ultimately wants you to build a really compelling business case that they just cannot say no to. The CTO wants reassurance on things like security, certainty, integrations, and usability. The CFO really cares about increasing revenue and reducing costs and risks. The COO ultimately wants to understand how your proposal software delivers not just today, but also, again, that future state tomorrow and beyond. And the CHRO needs to know that there's a genuine organizational need for the software. Navigate the internal procurement process by showing proof of value and vendor security, and knowing about pricing, payback period, and implementation. And again, just to stress, your personal credibility as a buyer is crucial to securing investment. And that's back over to you, Catherine.
Thanks, James, for taking us through that. Loads of really interesting stuff in there, and lots of aspects to consider, which I think sometimes particularly if you're new to navigating that procurement process, that some of these things might not be on your radar, or if you've purchased a HR system before, it's good to have a reminder of how to handle that C-suite team. This is something that we've been looking into here at Ciphr, and this webinar really just scratched the surface in the research we've done. We've spoken to all of our C-suite leaders, as well as some of our clients, about how their relationships they build with the C-suite. So if you're interested in reading more about how to secure C-suite investment for your HR technology, you can get a copy of our free guide. Just hit the button that's on your screen now, and you'll be taken straight to the form where you can download your copy. There's loads of really great intel in there and things to consider next time you're looking to either purchase a central HR software or just to add another aspect to your existing HR tech stack. So, for example, bolting on an LMS, for example. We hope that's been really useful for you, but that's all we've got time for today. If you want more information about what we do here at Ciphr, you can find us at ciphr.com. You can also reach our team at info@ciphr.com. Just when we finish this webinar, there'll be opportunity to offer some feedback. Please do fill that in, and that helps us improve for future webinars. Thank you, James. Really appreciate your time today. Thanks everyone for listening, and we hope to see you again at another Ciphr webinar soon. Take care. Goodbye.
Bye.